Today we are going to read chapter 6 of the book Someone Was Watching. Chris awoke with sunlight flowing through his open window and a sharp pain in his ribs. He stuck his hand between his side and the mattress and pulled out the video cassette. He hadn't dreamed it. A twinge of nervous excitement rippled through his body. He looked at his clock, 7:34. He hadn't gotten much sleep, but aside from a dull ache in his head, he felt good. Wide awake, he jumped from bed. He could hear his parents' voices in the kitchen, talking to each other. He tried to remember the last time they'd done that. He threw on some shorts and a wrinkled t-shirt and hurried downstairs. Somehow it seemed to him that he had no time to waste, although he wasn't sure what he was going to do. His mom and dad glanced up from the table in surprise when he walked into the kitchen. His dad made an exaggerated show of looking at his watch, at Chris, and back at his watch again. "It must have stopped. What time do you have, Lynn?" he said. His mom smiled. "Mine stopped too. It says 7:40. I guess we're both late for work." "Ha ha," Chris said sarcastically, sitting down at the table. It wasn't the first time he'd gotten up this early during the summer. He could think of at least one other time. "What's the occasion?" his dad asked. Chris thought for a moment, pretending to study the side of a cereal box. "Nothing," he said finally. "I just figured I'd better get used to getting up earlier. School's starting in 2 weeks. He poured himself some cereal and milk and spooned it into his mouth. He swallowed 3 mouthfuls before he realized that he didn't even know what kind of cereal it was. His mind was racing, cutting off everything else in the room. "What did you think about the tape last night, Chris?" his mom asked. The question startled him, bringing him back. He looked at his mom's face, but he could feel his dad's eyes on him. He chewed his cereal a long time before swallowing. "The tape?" Now that was a bright reply. I thought it was fine. I mean, it was nice seeing Molly, nice to be reminded of how she was. Not as painful as I thought." He considered for a moment, wondering if they'd like to know what he really thought, then resumed reading the cereal box. "That's what we felt too," his mom said. "We're really glad we have the tape. Thanks for helping us take it, Chris." "It weren't nothing," he said. "I think Dad shot most of the good scenes anyway. I especially enjoyed the classic restroom exit." His dad laughed. His mom shook her head. "I think I've seen that scene too many times," she said. "Originality is not one of your father's strong points." Chris took another bite of cereal and stared out the window at the basketball hoop and pine trees in the backyard. He turned a question over in his mind until he thought it sounded okay. "Mom," he finally said. She looked up from some work papers she'd been studying. "Do you remember on the day we lost Molly when you ran to the phone to call the police and firemen?" His mom stared at him and nodded her head slowly. She set her cup down on an angle, spilling coffee on the white tabletop. His dad looked quizzically across the table at him. "Yes, I do, Chris," she said. "I won't ever forget it." "When you got to the phone," he continued, "did you see anything in the parking lot? Anything unusual, I mean." "Like what?" she said, twisting her wedding ring around on her finger. "Was Clover and Bud's ice cream truck there?" She looked at him blankly. "Did you see it?" he said. "Do you remember hearing it?" She continued to look in his direction, but he could see her focusing on another scene far away in miles in time. "No," she said, "just cars. Just a few cars in the parking lot. If I had seen Clover or Bud there, I would have asked them for help. I'm sure they weren't. And I don't remember hearing the music." "Neither do I, Chris," his dad said. "But why are you asking?" Chris had his answer ready. "Oh, I was doing what Dr. Wilde said, trying to visualize what happened that day, remembering everything and dealing with it now instead of putting off dealing with it." His dad searched Chris's face, looking for the real explanation there, no doubt, but Chris maintained his best sincere expression. Finally, his dad smiled, a bit forced, but he smiled. "Seems like a good idea," he said. He got up from the table and carried his dishes to the sink. His thoughts seemed to be somewhere else. "Do you think they'll ever find her? Her body, I mean?" Chris asked. He wasn't convinced that someone, even a small someone, could drown and never be found. He wanted his parents to tell him that everyone who had ever drowned in the river had been recovered. He watched his dad turn and look at his mom. His dad looked as if he wanted to avoid answering this one. She glanced up from her work papers at his dad and then at Chris. Her face had suddenly turned gray. Chris was sorry he'd asked the question. He wanted to yell, "But what if she isn't even dead? Maybe she's alive." Instead, he said, I mean, does it really happen that someone could drown in a river and never be found? It happens, Chris, his dad finally said. Molly drowned in a big river. It's possible that her body won't ever be found. Oh, Chris said, but that didn't prove anything to him, just that she could have drowned. It didn't mean she had. It didn't mean there wasn't a real reason why his heart was thumping like a large rabbit in his chest. It didn't mean he couldn't try to find out what that reason was. But we hope they do find her sometime soon, his mom said, her eyes glistening in the sunlight, filtering through the kitchen curtains. We'd all feel better if she were closer to us, if we knew where she was. I know I would. Me too, Mom, Chris said. Me too. His dad walked over to the table, gave them each a hug, and went upstairs to finish getting ready for work. Chris's heart was beating loudly. He was afraid his mom would be able to hear it from across the table. Is it okay if Pat and I ride our bikes over to the mall today, Mom? We thought we'd look around for school clothes and go to a movie, and then I'm invited to his house for dinner. That sounds fine, Chris. It looks as if I may have to work late tonight anyway. Do you need money for the show? No, I've got enough. Well, if you find any clothes you like, we can go back and look at them tomorrow night, she said. Okay, Mom. He jumped up from the table and sprinted upstairs to the phone in his room. After calling the bus depot, he dialed Pat's number. He asked Pat's mom to get him out of bed. Pat dropped his phone once before picking up and managed a sleepy grunt. Chris waited until he heard Pat's mom hang up the other phone. Are you by yourself? He asked. Yeah, what time is it anyway? Pat mumbled. It's getting late. We've only got an hour to get to the bus depot. Excuse my ignorance, but why do we want to go to the bus depot? Pat was waking up. We need to catch the 9 o'clock bus to Greenwater. You just got back from Greenwater. Brilliant, Pat, but you're wasting a lot of time. I need to go back there. Can you go with me? I'll explain it to you on the way. I'll ask my mom, but I don't think she'll go for it. Mine wouldn't have either. She thinks we're riding our bikes to the mall to look for clothes, seeing a movie and going back to your house for dinner. You better give yours the same story, except make it dinner at my house. Pat was silent for a moment. What time are we coming back? He said finally. I don't know. It depends on what we find. Before dark, anyway. The buses run every 2 hours. More silence on the other end. Then, Chris? Yeah? Chris could feel his patience disappearing and his stress level going up. What are we going there for? I'll tell you later. Just go ask your mom. He heard the phone clunk down on Pat's table, then silence. He waited, nervously glancing at his watch. Say it's okay, he thought, concentrating hard. Then Pat was back. My mom says yes, mystery man. I could be ready in 10 minutes. How much money do I need? Chris allowed himself a sigh of relief. He didn't want to make this trip alone. The bus is $18 round trip, and we'll need some money for food. I'd say another $5 or so. Do you need some money? I've got some saved. I'll let you buy me some ice cream at the Clover Bud, though. Chris shook off a chill. I'll do that, he said. Suddenly, he pictured Clover and Bud standing behind the counter, smiling down at Molly. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Then I figure it's 15 minutes to the bus depot on our bikes. That should give us enough time to get the tickets and catch the 9 o'clock bus. Sounds good, Pat said, but I have to admit you've got me real curious. I hope you have a good story for me. I'll let you decide, Chris said, and hung up.